Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the podcast, Not Quite Strangers. My name is Valerie Hope. I'm your host. I'm also a professional speaker and a leadership coach. And it's always my pleasure to bring two people together who don't know each other very well, in this case, not at all, and have a meaningful conversation. So specifically, because I want to inspire curiosity. I really want to help people establish connections, and more than anything, shift the perspective as well. And this is a wonderful opportunity to do that because I have these two phenomenal people in my presence that I want to introduce real quick. If you have not subscribed to this podcast yet, you can do so if you go to notquitestrangers.com. You can also subscribe in whichever your favorite podcast platform is, but make sure that you rate us, favorite us, love us, like us, whatever you think is appropriate, so that way you don't miss a single episode. Now, for today's guests, I will start with you, Chivan. Chivan Lim, I had the opportunity to meet you it's been months. So it was June of 2022, because I was a keynote speaker at the Washington State Association Executives Conference. That's a mouthful. The WSAE conference, and you were one of the hosts of the event. You were there managing of the speakers and the participants, etc. But I think the moment that I was just like, man, Chivan, you'll be an amazing guest, is because there was a member of the audience who stopped me to ask a question about working with people of different generations and some of the struggles that she was experiencing, and was really wanting to figure out how to connect with some of the younger generation. And as she was asking me, I'm like, I don't know what you're asking me. I'm no longer one of those generations. So, but you know who would be? Let me introduce you to Chivan. So that was like my Not Quite Strangers moment at the event. So I took her to you, and the advice that I don't even remember what you said, but the level of conviction and the passion for how you communicated what you communicated to her, and the wisdom, I was like, oh, snap, okay.
This kid got some spunk, yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, this guy knows some stuff. This is amazing. And you didn't even bat an eye. You just said, you introduced yourself and you just went on. And I the confidence in which you delivered what you delivered, but also your openness to engage on the spot was what I really thought, man, I admired that. So I'm like, okay, you need to be on my podcast. And gratefully you said yes. Yeah, and then it was so cool. And then I had a similar experience. So later that evening, we had a dinner and then I was, sitting at this table, and there were several participants there and several audience members. And in particular, one who had a daughter. And as we were having conversations, I started to engage and ask the daughter all these questions. And all of a sudden I was just like, hey, so what do you do? Do you work? And she's like, no, I just graduated from high school. I'm like, what? And that was Kyra. And Kyra, when you were sharing with me at the time, and I can't remember how it all went down, but we had a speaker that evening who was focusing on the native tribes of Tulalip. We were at Tulalip Resort, and I can't remember. Is that the name of the native tribe that she belonged to? Tulalip.
Yeah, Tulalip.
Tulalip. I apologize. Tulalip. And she did a prayer, and she spoke. She shared her message. But Kyra, you had some really wonderful, beautiful, really profound reflections on the experience, and when you shared how committed you were to really sharing the message of what it means to be Native American, and your passion for that, I was like, passionate, purposeful, articulate. All right, Kyra, she needs to be on my podcast too. And then of course, I'm like, who would have known that in one event, I would have found two of you to bring together. So welcome to Not Quite Strangers.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Valerie. That's awesome that you met both of us at the event. Yeah, it's interesting. I know like one side of the coin, right? But I didn't know the other. So, such a good event, by the way. Shout out to WSAE. Pretty funny. I felt like, walking around, I was like, oh my gosh, I just look like this teenager walking around in this like convention center, taking hors d'oeuvres from every plate he can. And they're like, who gave this teenager a drink ticket? As I'm walking up, they're like, gonna ID me from like outside of the door. It's like, so I'm like, one Modelo, please. And they're like, you haven't drank an ounce in your life, have you? And I'm like, I swear I'm 25. Yeah. But so much fun. Yeah.
It was a fun night. So
Um,
I'm curious because you guys didn't know me at all. We had a few moments of interaction throughout that event. What had you say yes to being in a podcast with another stranger? Like, why did you say yes? Whoever wants to start.
I'll go. I think like the biggest thing was when you told me that you kind of like facilitate the conversation. Because based on the way that you were asking me questions, asking me follow-up questions, asking me how I felt about what I was telling you, just I've never really had someone like pay that much attention to what I'm saying, if that makes sense. I was really inclined to like share that with you more, share that with someone else. Yeah.
Wow.
right.
I've not been told that before in the podcast, Kyra. That's really kind. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm sorry that you haven't had more people pay that much attention because what you have to say is really fascinating. All right.
Thank you.
So you'll see. This might open up some conversations for you too.
Right. Oh, yeah. Depending on that, I come from more of a space of a community, in any scenarios where I can meet people or I can connect with new groups of people who I usually wouldn't connect with. I'm all for it. And so it would be different if you were like, this is a podcast that I'm doing about Star Trek or something, you know what I mean? Or like about like architecture and like fashion or
Oh.
something, I'd be like, I'd be like, that sounds like fun. Let me see if it's on my calendar. I don't know. And then but it's like where you're like, hey, I'm doing this thing where you interact with strangers, and then I'm like, oh yeah, put me in. Yeah. And so it was more for the topic and the fact that I get to meet people for me. So
Right
and
on.
I get to talk to you more. So
Yes. Very cool. Well, I'm excited for both of you. One of the reasons you probably could already hear that I connect with people is when I hear and see people have a passion and a openness to share something. So I'm curious about what kind of conversations you like getting into. It sounds like both of you are interested in other people, or at least interested in some aspect of life that you share with other people. So what are the kind of common topics or issues that you would say, oh, I need to jump in this conversation? Or maybe if you don't have one in general, like what's the latest one for you right now? Whoever wants to start.
yeah, okay. All right, I'll start. Yeah, I think one of the topics that I love talking about right now is kind of our generation. So I'd say between like 18 and 25. Maybe I'm at the later generation, but like my early 20s. But how to like make it, I guess, and how to be like how to make a living, I guess, within your early 20s. When gas prices are phenomenal. Rent is like skyrocketed. And you're kind of just fresh out of college or fresh out of high school or maybe in college. Not to speak on how expensive college is, but that's a whole different thing. But it's like, how is this stuff possible? You know what I mean? Because it's like we're popping out of high school, most of us, without any savings or like, you know what I mean, or like any of those things. And so it's a conversation that I like to have a lot because yeah, everything is so expensive, and it's like, how do you get out of that burden? How do you take the next step into making a living?
Why is that important to you though? Like, what is it about that
Um,
particular topic of the economy and making a life? Why does that matter for you?
yeah, I think so for me personally, like working, if minimum wage here is like what 15 now, it's actually pretty high in Washington. Or just working a job in general. And for a lot of my friends, when I'm like reflecting on them and looking at where they're at in their lives, like a lot of people that are just like me, um, it's interesting because it's like we're looking at like 70 to like sometimes 80% of their income is just going like straight into like rent. You know what I mean? And they have like a little bit to spare for like to have fun. And then most of like my friends don't even have like an emergency savings. So if something were to happen, it's like not good,
Yeah.
And I think I come from more for a place that it kind of scares me, at least, and I'm like I like with gas being so expensive, now I'm strategic about where I go places, So if I'm like in this area, I'm like, okay, like I better make the most out of going to this area, you know what I mean? If I'm gonna go to Portland, I better make the absolute most of it, or it's gotta matter. Otherwise, I'm not spending. In my car, it's like just to get to Seattle, that Seattle and back is like a $35 trip. And so
And
yeah,
it's like an
it's a pretty
hour, right?
interesting.
From Olympia to Seattle, it's like an hour, right?
Yeah, if you're going at like 10 p.m. or like 6 in the morning, yeah, you're good. But anytime in between, oh my god, forbid that people actually know how to merge on the highway correctly, and there's no car accidents. Because if there's a car accident, yeah, you're better off walking.
Yeah.
I-5 is just a hole.
Got it.
Kyra could speak on that. Yeah. But know that like this topic actually interests me because it's more from a place of worry. It's like I worry that it's like what if something does happen, and then it's like a lot of us don't have the funds. Of course, a lot of us end up making it out because we have a lot of people to depend on, but it's a scary thing, I guess. Like moving, like being in your early 20s is so scary. Advancing in the world when you really don't, first of all, you barely have any skills, you know what I mean? Usually, because it's like, now you're finally becoming an adult. Let me tell you, when I had to file my taxes by myself, terrifying, you know what I mean? They don't teach you how to file your taxes in school. And I'd never learned about like a mortgage or like how like federal rates work, you know what I mean? Or like how to even get a loan out for a car. Like all that stuff was like all you had to research. And it was just a very scary time in your early 20s. And then not to mention, you know what I mean? You're like, oh yeah, for a studio in Seattle, it's like, $1,500 and it's like a month. And it's like, oh, like maybe,
That's like
that's like minimum. Yeah.
Is that minimum?
That's like a cardboard box with a door. Yeah.
Yeah. That's baseline.
Wow. But you know what? I'm not gonna lie. This it's funny you sharing all this stuff out of a sense of concern and worry, Chivan, because you'd think we'd know better by now. I didn't know how to file taxes when I graduated from high school. I didn't know anything about mortgages. I didn't realize, wait, how do you find a decent price apartment and make sure that you're able to pay for it? Budgeting, like all of the things that you just mentioned, no clue, right? Buying a new car, all of the stuff that makes or breaks someone's life while we're doing the setup is not taught to us. I mean, Kyra, I don't know, you just graduated from high school, right?
Yeah.
So how much of this stuff were you familiar with from school?
Honestly, none of it. I didn't learn credit in school. I didn't learn taxes. I didn't learn any of that. And to be completely honest, I actually figured out taxes by myself because I've been working the past like 2 years and I didn't know how to do it. So I was like Googling every box and like trying to figure out like what matched up with what. Yeah, I don't know. There's not a whole lot that I was taught, and a lot of the stuff that you need, I kind of just figured out by myself.
Wow.
Right.
Well, I'm impressed because that was not me either. Well, we didn't have Google back then, in all fairness. So I think there's something there, but I'm that self-sufficient, Kyra. Wow.
Yeah.
The other thing is like if you get like the slightest thing wrong, like the IRS, they're on you, you know what I mean? And it's scary because it's like, man, like this is not easy stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're using words you've never even seen in the dictionary, fire taxes. Thank goodness for TurboTax, actually. But, if you do it on the IRS website, yeah, good luck.
I'm not being sponsored by any of these systems, by the way. I saw this this Instagram reel yesterday that just kind of, I'm sad to say, it kind of blew my mind a little bit. And, you know, you guys are talking about this stuff at your age. I was not talking about this stuff at your age, but it said, this guy was saying, did you know that banks are not to save your money? Banks are to manage the money you spend. And I was like, okay. Said, yeah, because, you know, when you want to put money down and you want to save money because you want to save money because your money will grow, right? Compound interest and all that. Your money does not grow in any significant way sitting in a bank. And then also depends on what kind of account you have. Like, so he's like, forget that. Do not put your money in a bank to save. You're better off taking that money and investing it in some place where you can actually see it grow. And I was like, how did I not know that till yesterday? Like, you know, like that never came to mind. And I'm just like, oh, so I'm calling my, and I have like, you know, an investment banker, and I've done some of that stuff, but I'd never thought about interacting with a bank in a completely different way than how I've been socialized to think, right? So
dude, when was this conversation that you had?
Yesterday. And it wasn't even a conversation. It was an Insta reel.
Oh, it was an Insta reel. Yeah. I love it. Yeah, I mean, finances is another thing that I love talking about here. I'm sorry if it's boring, but I won't go. Yeah. Finance, I love talking finances. It's actually weird how much I love talking finances, but
no, not weird. We may not go into like all the depths, but it sounds like something that might be helpful. But I want to give Kyra a chance to weigh in here on what you enjoy talking about. Like if you had it your way, Kyra, like what's one thing that you enjoy talking about? You can talk about all day, every day, any day.
I think like the number one thing that I will ask if I like meet someone at a conference, at a meeting, something like that, I'm gonna ask you like, what's a struggle in your community? And your community could be like socially, it could be like culturally, academically, all of that. I have struggled in all of those, like within my communities. And so I like to educate myself about what it's like for other people, their experiences with that.
What's the struggle? So, okay, so you got to answer the question then, because I think this is a great question. What is the struggle in your community? You've struggled with all this different stuff. So what is your community, first of all, and where is the most important struggle for you?
My community. I think the like number one up there would be the Indigenous community in the Seattle area, and obviously just across the country. Right now there's a quite an argument going on about blood quantum.
What is that?
So that would be your like percentage of like whatever nativeness, I guess.
Okay.
The amount of native in your blood.
Got it.
And that's like a big dividing thing, is a lot of like full natives aren't accepting of people who are half-bloods or something like that. Like it's comparable to like horses or like dogs, you know, like they're breeds based on their like genetics, that kind of thing. And then like to add on to that, another big thing is like res kids thinking that if you're like an urban Indian, you're not like native enough. So that's still a really big thing. And in school there's no like representation. Like they're just now at like the school district that I graduated from, they're just now trying to teach accurate Native history.
Hmm.
There was no recognition for land acknowledgements until like this past year. Yeah, so that's another like big thing, I guess. Like academically, it's inaccurate, it's not inclusive. Yeah, I think those are
So I think it's helpful to, for those that are listening who may not be familiar, right, with some of the Indigenous challenges or the topics that you raised. Can you share what is land acknowledgement? What does that mean?
land acknowledgement is an acknowledgement of whose land you're on. So it'll be from whoever, like if it's city property, they'll hopefully have their land acknowledgement accessible, saying that like I, city of whatever, acknowledge that I'm on Duwamish land, I'm on Suquamish land, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it was interesting. I had a conversation several months ago, maybe it's almost a year now, with a colleague of mine. She's also a coach, an executive coach, who's from New Zealand and works for the New Zealand government. And she was sharing how now they're making so many strides in land acknowledgement specifically. So in any public event, or I guess in any documents, they actually starting to acknowledge the land that they've built on, if, you know, some of the cultures that they're honoring, their own backgrounds as well. Whereas, you know, I think this is fairly recent for them too, maybe within the last 5 years or so. But it's interesting what you're saying is that as much influence as there is in Washington state of all these indigenous tribes, that's not being taught in school in an accurate way, right? That it's hardly, if at all. Wow.
Yeah.
Chivan, any reaction to what you're hearing there?
Yeah, you know, it's with the school districts and things, there's a lack of acknowledgement with those problems. It's actually good that you come to people like, what's your struggle? You know, because a lot of the times people are so absorbed in their own things, and I bet you, you know, school districts are in the way that it's like they're so absorbed in their own problems, and sometimes they make the decisions. It's oftentimes that the people making decisions probably aren't the people that should be making the decisions, are not asking out to their communities what, you know what I mean? And that's what I found even in like some of my circles, is the people in charge aren't reaching out to the communities and being like, hey, what are some of the curriculums or some of the struggles or some of the things that need to be taught or need to be shared within, you know what I mean? They're kind of like in their own circle and decide amongst the 5 of them what needs to happen, and then they think that's what's best for their communities, when in reality they need to get feedback from their communities, reach back out. I've been part of too many committees and too many teams that function that way, that it's not surprising that it happens in your life too. And so yeah, that's I guess that's the insight that I have on that. You know, it's coming from somewhat of a psychological standpoint, you know, that it's like oftentimes these committees, you know, are so absorbed within their own issues, and it's like even just one person, you know, if they have an issue, it's hard sometimes when you're thinking so much about your own issue that it's like, you know, you're so focused on that, but it's like they need to be branching out and then pulling all that information that they have as the 5 of them. I don't know why I have 5 fingers. Yeah. It's like, yeah.
Okay.
And like, you know, and then pulling all the information together. So I'd say, like, you know, if I had to think of a solution for those type of things and for it to actually be implemented in school systems, it sounded like now that it's finally being implemented, I bet you there's somebody in that community that probably actually has that struggle, as opposed to like they actually reached out and got the feedback back from it, because y'all have been probably advocating for that for a while, right? You know, and it's like, I bet you somebody got kicked out, somebody got put back in, you know, and this person is somebody who's dealing with the same struggle that you are. But that's just my guess. And from, you know, the things that I've been a part of. And so I'm happy to hear that, you know, finally they implement that. Unfortunately, it's on your way out, but, you know, happy for the next generations of your school district. So
I don't know. I have a feeling Kyra is going to be somehow influential, regardless of where she is in the academic chain.
right.
I have a feeling. You know what came to mind is, and you were also some of the other challenges that you mentioned, Kyra, like even within the Indigenous community, right? There seems to be some dissension about who's really included in this community, who's in, who's out, right? How are you Native enough? You said, which I think is fascinating conversation to have. I imagine with any group, you know, there was that one drop rule when it came to African Americans too. Like if you were in an interracial, if you're the result of an interracial relationship, or even rape, or whether it was rape or marriage or whatever, the fact that you had one drop of Black blood meant that you are Black, period, right? So that I think is interesting to hear that within the community, there are elements of what is the percentage, like what is the, you know, how much of it. So I don't think I've ever heard an African-American community talking about the percentage of African-American that they are, right? Like, I'm an immigrant from Panama. So for me, it's a little bit different. I wasn't born and raised in this country, but I have nieces and nephews who are mixed race. And I don't think they quantify the percentage of whiteness or Blackness that they have. So really fascinating. I want to pause here and ask for the two of you to one of the two of you to ask a question. What's a question that's bubbled up for you now, or a question that you'd like to introduce to this conversation?
Here, start us off.
Sure. I was just gonna ask you, like, your experience, like what communities have you experienced something like this in? How was it resolved? How was it addressed? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I think one of the many communities is actually, you know, school districts. Once again, you know what I mean? I think when certain factors hit, a lot of communities are neglected. We're talking like me, you know, first generation parents, you know, we came in and my parents didn't really speak English. And so it's like there was a lack of resources. It felt like for like kids who didn't necessarily weren't able to have help from their parents, you know, this was me speaking in elementary, and that was a struggle because my parents couldn't multiply, you know what I mean? They couldn't divide, you know, and I was like, like I was trying to figure out this stuff like semi on my own and trying to figure it out, you know, trying to take as much as I could from class and try to pull it in. Some other communities and stuff are, you know, directly kind of like my workplace, you know what I mean? It feels like in some of the groups that I'm involved with, you know, it's like the struggle is like they're not reaching out for feedback, like I was telling you, you know what I mean, and pulling it back in. A lot of the times they're making the decisions within themselves and not educating themselves about the different groups that are within our communities. Like just going out and just meeting people, like you can find out so much about different communities and their different struggles, and not being so engulfed in your own world is all I gotta say, you know. And so so yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting, having that experience. Being, you were born here in the States, right? Chivan, you said your parents, okay, your parents immigrated here. And I think it's it's hard for me to answer that question. I feel like I belong to so many different communities. Kyra, that's a hard question. You got my head spinning. I'm like, which one should I say? Because I also see my family as a community, because we're all kind of spread out all over. So that's a community of people that I'm influencing. There's obviously people that I work with. Although I'm self-employed solopreneur, I don't necessarily have a team, but I do connect and collaborate with a lot of other people. And then obviously my not quite strangers family, you know, all these individuals that I bring into this particular experience. I don't know what community I belong to, because I've always been challenged by finding where I fit in, because I feel like I'm not Hispanic enough. I was, you know, 9 years old when we immigrated to the US. not African-American enough. I'm not American enough. You know, like there's always, and I wouldn't say enough anymore. Maybe that's not the right word, but I don't know if I fit in any particular group of people. I do feel I've been gifted with an opportunity to connect with a lot of different types of people. I remember in 7th and 8th grade, we were living in Hawaii, and I had friends from all over, from Korea, Filipino, you know, Caucasian, Black, mixed, you name it. And that was like my posse. And it was always for me, it was always like how to bring all these different communities together, different representations of the communities together. And so mine's always kind of a hodgepodge. But I would say for me, the biggest struggle is for people not to see themselves strictly as a member of a community that just looks and sounds like them. Like our community, if we go deeper, it's a lot more expansive. And, you know, it's about people with interests, people with similar values, people with similar commitments to life, to the world, to the family. And that's almost a little bit harder to get to. You don't get that by just looking at someone or knowing where they live. You know what I mean? So that's where I would say the struggle is, which is what this podcast is really helping to hopefully address.
Chime in on, like, I remember one of the communities that I created was I had a dance club that I hosted in at South Puget Sound Community College, right? And that was really beautiful to me in a sense, because sometimes the hardest part about community is getting in a community, like finding a place to belong. To, you know, chime in a little bit, Valerie. That, like, mentioned to say, you know what I mean, when we had the dance club, that was one of our most important things, was we were going to welcome everybody and anybody, you know. And needless to say, like, what was really cool about it was I would have never, once again, would have never met these people if it wasn't for this community. Yeah. And one of the struggles of, it was a solution to the fact that there's a struggle in communities where people found it hard to get themselves in different communities, I guess. And so we created like a friend network, and to be honest, we ate more pizza and just hung out than danced sometimes. And so but it created a sense of loyalty and a backbone for us in community college. And yeah,
create community. That's huge.
Mm-hmm.
Kyra, what do you think? What do you think about our answers to your question? What stood out to you?
I think that with what you were saying, I don't think it has to be like one community that you belong to. I think that all these different pieces of yourself, like there's groups that have those same pieces, and then all their other pieces are going to be different. But this one community is the stuff that you guys have in common. And then I think that also, like, creating your community, if you're not seeing like representation, find people like yourself and invite others. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
Say that again. You faded out a little bit. Say that again, Kyra.
Oh, that's how I see it, like based on what you were saying.
That's how you say it. Nice.
Yeah.
Chivan, do you have a question? Oh, sorry.
I mean, well, to add, like, communities are so important, you know what I mean? To bond together and stick together throughout the thick and thin of what life is going to present your way is so important. And so I'm glad that you're, you know, Kyra, you're so community eccentric, because so am I, you know what I mean? Little did we know we'd find a common ground within like 10 minutes, but yeah, I mean, especially, you know, people of color folk, you know, like, I think it's a community on its own, because we experience our day life a little different than, you know, and so yeah, community. Super
well, that's top of mind. Kyra, have you read, or Chivan, have you guys read The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker?
I have the book, but I have not read it.
Wonderful book. I highly recommend it, because although the idea is about gathering, you know, Kyra, specifically with you looking at communities and how to support communities and helping people identify their struggles within their communities, what I think she does really well in the book is identify what, like you said, like pieces of different communities and helping those pieces honored through a gathering of some sort. Like, how do you take all these different disparate groups and create something that has meaning for everybody? And I think you might find some inspiration. Maybe it's not exactly what she does or how she does it, but might bring a level of exposure, experiences that you could then think about how to implement or how to expand to fit what you're working on, your commitments. So read it. Or at least check out her blog, because she also has a nice blog and she'll send stuff out once a month or so, where you can also get like a little download of the stuff that she's doing. But
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Chivan, what about for you? What question do you have?
All right. So I'm expecting a essay format, MLA. I need a conclusion and body paragraph. No. It's better be juicy. No. So my question is, it's a pretty common question, but I like to hear it. Actually, two questions. First one is, what's something you wish you knew, that you know now that you wish you knew earlier in your life? And also another thing is, what is something that you believe that you know, that's present about life, that is some advice that you would like to give people that are around your age?
Oh my gosh. I think like not being so fast to try and figure out what you want to do with your life, like what you want to do as a career. I think just like experience everything a little bit, see what stands out to you. I mean, I guess that's what I am doing. I'm a part of a few different groups, just trying to see where I would be the most happy, like as doing this as a career, like for the rest of my life, you know? But at the same time, I think that's also like advice that I would give is just like, let yourself experience all these different things. Don't be so quick to like come to a conclusion about like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to do anything else, that kind of thing.
Right. You know, what's interesting is like, I know. Yeah. It's interesting. It's such a weird, no, it's a good question, but it's a weird question. It's sometimes when you're growing up, when you're like everybody in your school, your teachers, everybody's like, what do you want to be? You know what I mean? It almost feels like pressure. You know what I mean? It's almost pressuring you. It's like, what do you want to be? What do you want to be? What do you want to do? I remember for high school, we had to write for advisory, you know what I mean? We had to write like, this is how I will like achieve my goal to be a blank, 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 blank. Cause this is what, you know, like they tried to like milk that out of you a little bit. Like, you know what I mean? Like that was a thing. And like, this is how the prerequisites I'm gonna do for that, which is, it's cool now. But I remember I felt that pressure, you know what I mean? As opposed to like, whoa, like I don't quite know what I want to do yet. And so, yeah, sometimes it feels like, you know, the outside pressures of the world can be kind of pushing you to do that. To like figure out, and it's an identity thing, you know, in a way, you know what I mean? It's like, shoot, so it's like you're challenged because sometimes in school it felt like your friends knew what they were going to do, right? But then you're like, shoot, I don't know what to do. Then you're struggling with identity, you know, you're like, wait, do I know who I am or want to be, you know? And so it's such a weird conflict.
Yeah.
Well, so you know, Kyra, I love your answer to this, because you're right. We do push people to know what they want to do, but that's at all stages of life, by the way. It's not even when you're young. I work with people who have been in the workforce for 20, 30 years sometimes. And every year is like, so what do you do next? What career path are you taking? Like what? I remember back in the day, and I was older than you, Chivan. I was probably in my late 20s at the time. And I remember having a boss. I was transitioning from one role to another, and I had to go through like a little mini internal interview process so I could get this promotion. And the boss asked me, he said, so Valerie, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I was like, oh my gosh, I hate that question. And I remember taking a minute, I took a beat and I said, well, I don't know where exactly, but I know that I will be happy. I'll still be satisfied and curious with what the work I'm doing. I'm excited about the things I'm doing. I said, I kind of see that. And he sat back and he crossed his arms and he was like, that's the most airheaded response I have ever heard to that question. But he said, but if I did know you better, I said, if I did know you better, I would say that's an airheaded response. But he had seen me work, at least for a couple of years at that point. And so I think he understood. But the key that you said, Kyra, that really stood out to me is most of us don't even know what makes us happy. Like, if we can't articulate what makes us happy, how will we know what we're going to be doing 5 years from now that will make us happy? Right? We have, like you said, Chivan, all these little, like, external standards of excellence and fulfillment, like other people telling us, this is what you should do, this is how you should look, this is where you should work, this is how you should dress, this is what you should drive, like this is where you should live, like all these different really random criteria for what satisfaction looks like in life. But ask the people who are living it, not all of them are happy, not all of them are fulfilled, not all of them are satisfied.
Right,
like,
true.
Come on. So yes, huge. Just find out what makes you happy and go do it. That's my goal.
It was crazy, now that I am now, as doing like event planning and finally found some foot in the ground. 24 years old. Yeah, you know what I mean? At the time when I found out, and I was like, this is what I want to do. But boy, I couldn't have told myself when I was 18, like, you know what I mean? Like, I was pushing myself. I was like, Chivan, you need to figure out what you're gonna do with your life, you know what I mean? And then 6 years later, it finally hit me. You know what I mean? But like, boy, did it take some time. Yeah. So yeah, and along with the external, your parents will be in the whole external factor, like, hey, like, what you doing? You know what I mean? Like, you better let us know. It's like, like, I'm working on it. So
good question. I'm curious about, for the two of you, and this is a little bit lighter question, right? Because we were just kind of talking about happiness. Like, when was the last time you felt happy? When you felt like, and I say happy, I'm really talking more about joy, right? Like when you felt that it wasn't contingent on something good happening necessarily, or somebody doing something, but really more about your internal state. Like, can you think of a time when recently where you felt that, like, satisfaction and fulfillment about yourself or about your life?
Mine was actually like really recent. Last week, me and a group of other natives, we went across the ferry to Bainbridge Island, which is Suquamish land, the Suquamish tribe. And we were invited to their canoe launch for their canoe journey. And just the sense of community, it just, like, it filled me with so much peace. Like, I felt at home there, and it was just like pure joy. It was great.
What was it like, the sense of community? Like, what did you see or feel, experience here that made you feel that peace?
It was actually during the thunderstorms. We had like a couple hours of thunderstorms last week. It was really nice. And that was like at the time when they're supposed to be leaving, but it was raining so hard, everything flooded, their boats got filled with water. So everybody's like running, bringing the else back up to dry it off. Just everybody being there for each other, everyone helping each other out, helping others before they're helping themselves, that kind of thing.
Beautiful. It's so interesting because, someone else might say that, oh no, we got flooded out and it was raining and it was such a pain and the launch didn't go the way it's supposed to go. But you saw exactly the opposite. you saw there was like a moment of community and partnership and collaboration and support and service. Like you saw all
Yeah.
of that because it didn't go the way it was planned to go.
Yeah, it was great. It was so great.
Love that.
You know, I want to say, yeah, I feel like most of the times anybody like experiences, you know, those moments of joy and stuff. Like you're with your people. Most of the times you have those moments, it's like you're with, you know, just relaying back to community and stuff. And it's like when you got your homies with you, it's like it's always a good time, let me tell you.
Yeah.
And so by no surprises, that was one of the moments. And I do kind of remember those storms actually. So it was a, you know, we've had a sunny August. So to kind of like come in one day with storms, like it's funny. I knew like the exact day and the exact time that you're talking about. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so really cool that you had that experience and was able to share it with the folks.
Super cool. Chivan, what about you?
Yeah, I want to share, man. It's crazy because you were like overjoyed with, you know what I mean? You were saying all those like words and describing. I was like, man, it was like yesterday, like my waiter came through with the pad thai, and I was like, you know what I mean? Let me tell you, I was like fork and knife in hand. I was like, oh my gosh, you were some bomb pad thai last night. But I want to make this way more interesting than that.
You know, it doesn't have to be, by the way. I had some pad bun sen and it hit the spot.
Yo, oh my gosh, every time. I know, I was like, here, I was like, yo, when you've got your people, like it's so good. Anyway, so when my pad thai came out, yeah.
Yeah.
But what I want to share is because I feel like I like literally like joy, like it's like an everyday thing, you know. So I had to sit down. I was like, okay, Chivan, like find something interesting. One of the things I want to talk about is the kind of semi-recent law, probably about a month ago, but I went on like a writer's retreat with my band. And so Kyra, to fill you in, I play in a music band. I play guitar, and we did like a little writer's retreat. We went up towards up 101 towards the peninsula, and we were like, all right, we're gonna go write some songs and kind of hang out and see what comes of it, right? It was cool because we ended up going, like as a band, it was like for the first time we were out there, and it felt like me, a workaholic with like my event planning is crazy because you manage like 17 other people's schedules, right, and work around their time. For once to kind of take a step back from it and not have to worry about those things was such a relief off my shoulders for like one of the first times in my life. And to be out there, and that didn't matter, and we're just kind of chefing it up, we're cooking, you know. Aside from the fact that we make music together, we have sort of, sometimes we don't really have a lot of time to just hang out. And so to have that opportunity with us where we're not, I'm just a workaholic, you know what I mean? So it's like to hang out is so cool, you know, and not have to work. And we were like cooking and stuff, and we were out in this Airbnb, and we ended up making a song. Actually, it's going to be released in the coming months. And so y'all kind of have the backstory now of it. It's going to be called We Coast. It's going to be kind of like an R&B kind of like pop song, but that was one of my times. And once again, you know, it connects to the fact that, you know, I had my people, and you know, at those moments, like nothing else really matters. It's just you and your people writing some music and hanging out. And the cooking, oh my gosh, the amount of avocados we ate, the guacamole, and to reminisce.
Chivan, tell Kyra about your the name of the band or where she could find it, and actually the listeners too, so they could know.
Yeah, so my band, we're called Winehouse. We're based out of Olympia, most of us, and we write indie pop, sometimes like alternative jazzy kind of sounding music. This next song has more of an R&B flavor. It's called We Coast, but you can find us on Spotify. It's just Winehouse. Can be mistaken for Amy Winehouse, but it is just one word. And yeah, if you give us a listen, it's awesome, good stuff. So all of I would appreciate the support.
I'll put the link in the show notes so that way people know where to find you.
Oh, okay, awesome. Yeah. We promote peace, love, and positivity. So you gotta love us. So. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so as we come towards the end of our conversation, I know, right? It's went by so quickly. I want to first of all, thank you all so much for sharing such wisdom. You guys dropped some wisdom today. We went deep.
Yeah, I felt like it. Yep.
I'm curious about, what was this experience like? What are you taking away from the conversation, or what observations do you have?
I want to say it actually felt like we just touched the surface. Yeah, I feel like we could have probably could have went in deeper.
Mm.
I think with some proposed prompts, Valerie, if you had some stuff, I think we could have dug in a little deeper, because I was like, I've got some questions, but then I'm like, damn, is there anything that I can like dig under the surface? And so yeah, and it's interesting because I would do this again. You know what I mean? I know you have to feature like other guests and stuff, but if somebody calls out, just pull me in.
Hey.
If somebody doesn't wake up on time, just pull me in.
Oh, shade.
I'm kidding. I'm joking. Yeah. And so, yeah, no, this was a lot of fun. And Kyra, it was such a pleasure to meet you, and cool that you're out of Edmonds. I think with more time, I would love to hear about Edmonds and like what's popping up there. You know what I mean? I'm down here in the South. We're holding it down. But want to hear Edmonds. Like, describe where's Edmonds located? Just past Everett, is that right?
It is a little bit south of Everett.
Okay.
If you think of like Seattle and then Shoreline,
Mm-hmm.
Edmonds is like the next city over. Like,
Okay.
So.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm trying to know what happens in Edmonds. Yeah.
Say that again, Kyra. You're muted.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying that like I'm right on the border of King County.
Okay. Right on.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, it might be a $35 trip, but it sounds like you guys could, if you wanted to, connect.
Yeah, taking the light rail. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe Kyra can go check out one of your festivals. You have a concert and stuff and that kind of thing. Or maybe, Kyra, you have an event coming up with the Indigenous community that's open to others, and invite. What about for you, Kyra? How is this for you?
It was really great. Like, I wish that we could just keep talking forever, but I think that it was really meaningful, like what we did talk about and what we did touch on. Yeah.
Okay, love that. And I want to start a new tradition. I heard it on a different podcast recently, this podcast called The Diary of a CEO. And the host asked the guest, what questions would he like to have future guest, the next guest, answer? So I'm going to start the tradition here, Not Quite Strangers, because I think it would be so cool for you guys to come up with a question or a prompt for whoever I invite next to the podcast to answer. Again, building that community, right? So
right.
What question do you guys think I should ask the next guest? Just give me a question each.
All right, give me 2 seconds.
Could be about anything. Go for it, Kyra.
Maybe to like find something that they have in common. Like, I don't know. That's the first thing that came to mind, is like, what do you have in common with whoever you're having this conversation with?
Okay. What do you have in common with the person you have a conversation with? Cool. All right, Kyra. And then Chivan, what about for you?
I guess, what are the people like in your hometown?
What are the people like in your hometown? Nice. Love it. Thank you. And then the last thing, so that's for the future guests, but for this audience, so whoever's been tuning in and listening to us, based on the conversation or what you know about yourself or what you know about each other, what's a challenge? If you were to challenge people who are listening to you speak today, what challenge would you pose to them? Something that you'd like for them to do, try, think, feel, etc.
For me, I gotta bring it back to the Indigenous side of things.
Yeah.
And I want to ask like listeners, whose land are you on? Like, make sure you know what tribal land you are residing on, you go to school on, you go to work on. Just because that acknowledgement means a lot to the of Indigenous people.
I got chills, Kyra. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know Dallas, Texas, where what Indigenous people lived here. And so I will find out.
Okay.
Yes. All right. Chivan, what about you? Any challenge for the audience, for the listeners, viewers?
I guess just, challenge out there and go make a difference. You know what I mean? I challenge people, if you have something, you know, that you've been aching to do or aching to be a part of, or, you know what I mean? Like, take the courage and go do it. Chances are, there's a lot of people just like you, and there's a lot of people looking up to people like you. And, you know, to take the first step, you're setting the example for many. So yeah, just,
right.
you know, work up that courage and do what you think you can't.
Ooh, do what you think you can't. Love that. Do what you think you can't. Take the courage and do it. Wow. Thank you both so much. And I do encourage the two of you to connect beyond this conversation if you can. If there's
Kyra, you
appetite for it.
Instagram? Yeah.
I do.
All right. We need to
drop
connect
it to me.
Yeah.
I will.
Yeah.
Love that. But thank you both so much. I so appreciate how much, first of all, your generosity with each other, and not only the answers that you gave, but also the questions that you took the time to ask. You're listening to one another and to me, and all the things that I think you said that inspired the audience. And we touched on a lot of things. To your point, Chivan, it could have been deeper, but I think you both gave so much food for thought, so much. You know, it's maybe not as filling as pad thai, but it's definitely food. It's food nonetheless.
Yeah.
I want to thank you both for saying yes to being a part of this experiment and for sharing so generously. And I want to thank the audience for tuning in to this episode of Not Quite Strangers. Again, put your comments in the chat. If there's something that resonated with you, please do answer it. Is there something that, first of all, acknowledgement, like you mentioned, Kyra, that the land acknowledgement, put it in the comments. What land are you sitting in right now? Where, you know, who does that land belong to? And then also, is there something that you've been aching to do that you've stopped yourself? You didn't have the courage. Chivan told you, go do it. Do what you think you can't do. And so any comments in the chat to let them know the impact of their words and their ideas would be super helpful. Know that you can subscribe at www.notquitestrangers.com and also rate, like, or love us on any of your podcast platforms. Have a wonderful rest of the day, everybody. Thank you.
All right, y'all.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the podcast Not Quite Strangers. Be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite video or podcast platform. And for more information and content, go to notquitestrangers.com. See you next time.